Welcome to the For the Love of the Game podcast with your host, Jefferson Belfort, and yours truly, Brian Hernandez. How you doing, Brian?
I'm doing well. I like the yours truly. That's
Yeah,
pretty
I've been
good
adding
there.
that now.
Yeah, exactly. You did it. That was cool. That was cool. But yeah, I'm doing really good. Another great week. What we have close to is it one more week of basketball? We have like another 4 games left per team. Very exciting stuff. Getting close to the playoffs and the play-in and all that stuff, which we're gonna talk a lot about today. Very excited. How are you doing, Jeff?
I'm doing pretty good actually, but it's kind of funny too. And we'll get into this more deeply. But the East still does not have its situation settled with any of its seeds, which is hilarious from 1 to 10. So there's going to be a lot of like interesting stuff that happened in this last week that we have of regular season. I think it's a week and change of regular season we have left, but we'll see. We'll see how it goes.
We shall see.
Perfect. So the topics that we have lined up for today are first starting off with the Clippers, and are they poised for a deep playoff run this year? Then next, we're going to get into the play-in scenarios and some of our predictions of how that pans out. And then next will be, are the Bucks a dirty team? Question mark. And then closing it out with a weekly roundup. Brian, are you ready?
Yeah, man, let's get into it.
Perfect. All right. So starting off, like I was mentioning, the Clippers. So the Clippers find themselves seated in the eighth seed in the West currently with a 38 and 40 standing in the records. But don't let the record deceive you. The Clippers have been met with a lot of misfortune in the season with losing both of their star players. But the job that they've been doing with the likes of Reggie Jackson and Marcus Morris picking up the weight while both of their star players have been out, and Terrence Mann, guys like Luke Kennard, and notable acquisitions. Norman Powell and Robert Covington, who had, I believe, last night or the night before that, 11 3-pointers. I believe it was last
Yeah,
night, actually.
yeah, it was.
Um, as sorry, as they beat as they beat the Bucks in blowout. Obviously, a lot of starters sat out in that game, but still another. Nevertheless, they were able to close out the Bucks in a, I believe it was 153 to 118 win last night. And what do you think about this team? I know this conversation is spurred by one of our good friends of the show, Eric Richter. But
Yeah.
what do you think about this team?
Yes, exactly like you're saying. One of our good friends, Eric Richter, he writes for the New York Post. It's really cool to say. But he had a pretty interesting article that he put out there about the Clippers. And then it was like a lot of betting odds and all that stuff. I'm not a bettor, so I don't really know a lot of the terms and everything. But at the end of the day, the basis of his article was talking about Paul George came back, and then as well, Kawhi Leonard and the rumors surrounding that, and how he could potentially come back for the first round of the playoffs if the Clippers make it there, of course, because as of now, they sit in the play-in. And what's really interesting that in this article where Richter pulled out, Eric Richter, he pulled out that 3 weeks ago, there was a report that Kawhi Leonard went through an extensive shooting drill when they faced off against the Golden State Warriors. And then as well, this reporter, Young Simuk, reported just 5 days ago at that time that Kawhi Leonard could return for the first round of the playoffs. Norm Powell and Paul George getting healthy. And then as well, he mentioned that Bill Simmons fed these rumors on the podcast where he said that Bill Simmons has also heard a ton of rumblings about Kawhi Leonard potentially coming back. So there seemed like there's some decent bases here. And this gets really interesting because we've talked a few weeks ago about what if, like, how dangerous could this Clippers team look like if they had Kawhi and Paul George back, but we never actually thought that it could be a reality. Now, Paul George back, Kawhi potentially is there. This team could be the biggest, or I think they are the biggest sleeper team if Kawhi could come back for the first round. Because already with Paul George back, I think they're good enough to get to that first round. Because right now, where it seems like they're going to have to verse the Timberwolves in just looking at how the seedings place as of now, and it looks like they're kind of going to stay this way just because of how much space there is for movement. The Clippers would verse the Timberwolves in that play-in round. So they either win or lose that. I could kind of favor them to win, but even if they lose, they will just verse like the winner of the Pelicans and the Spurs. So they're, as of now, probably going to be versing the Suns and the Grizzlies, or the Grizzlies in that first round matchup, which I think for anyone would say those are the two teams you don't want to you don't want to mess with. Uh, so this is where it's so interesting to me. Jeff, what do you think about like all this and like how far they can actually even go in the playoffs?
So they're, uniquely they are like the Nets in that same way,
Yep.
as you mentioned, is that there's so much unknowns about their situation, which
Yep.
makes them a compelling team to see go into the playoffs and see how they figure it out. I think the game has changed a lot in the sense of like how the playoff game is played.
Yep.
Um, you know, I've seen in the last couple of years that you have time in the playoff to grow from one game or even two. Think about the amount of like 3-1s we've seen in
Yep.
our lifetime be reversed, 2-0s be reversed in our lifetime. It just goes to show like a series could go anyway, like no matter at a
Yep.
drop of a dime in cases now. And a lot of that is attributed to how the game is played now. And that's why I think that this favors what the Clippers have and the situation they are presented with. Because I think the Clippers would love to see the Suns again because I think that they really believe that they had a chance at executing it last year and going to the finals, even without Kawhi Leonard, with how his team was presently constituted at that given moment. But now I believe they've even gotten better. Like some
Yeah.
some of the players I already named are bona fide guys to have on your team, to have guys also that have winning pedigrees. Like I mentioned, a Norman Powell, obviously Kawhi Leonard, if he's able to make it back, it is huge. Like
Yep.
those guys know what it takes to win. So they could be helping fuel what the team decides to do. Um, Obviously, even if and based off what I'm seeing, is I mean, Norman Powell hasn't really played a lot because of
Yep.
injuries lately, but still, even just having that presence on the bench bolsters an experience for that team as well. So I think that yes, like you mentioned, they'll be playing potentially, most likely, barring like something unforeseen. I don't think
Yeah.
there's any chance actually, with just like 5 or 6 games left, that they lose that 8 seed and they would be facing the Timberwolves. The Timberwolves are a little green in my mind, where they sit. Yes, they have like a sense of toughness that you haven't seen from them, I would say
Yep.
ever. But I still think that that the Clippers have enough to beat them. But let's say they don't, and they do find their way, like you said, playing the Pelicans or the Spurs. I think that's easily decided with them getting the W. So making a run is pivotal on Paul George being Paul George, and in the few games that he's been back, you've seen that he's still Paul George. So I think they are poised for they can cause some upsets. I wouldn't say I would lift them to title contender until I get word or updates of where Kawhi is. But I do think that they could easily find their way into the second round and
Yeah.
make it very interesting with whoever they had to play in that second round.
So you said you wouldn't put them as a contender without Kawhi. With Kawhi, would you put them as a contender?
And that goes back into like
Yeah.
I was saying about the Nets situation.
Yeah.
Is like this we said last year was a unique season, but I think this year has
Yeah.
proven to be even more unique in how different and strange it's been. And that's why I believe that yeah, you bring Kawhi in there, it completely changes your expectations
Yeah.
of what you think you can do and what you could bring to the table. And honestly, I think a lot of teams out west are fearing that as
Hmm.
well too. Is because Kawhi comes back, he's not the type of guy that just like sleeps to the back. He's
Hmm.
very, very and I don't even know the best word to put it, but I guess the best way to phrase it is a guy that makes his presence known right away. So you bring that type of player back, you got a lot of teams shaking in the knees.
Yeah, it's pretty crazy. And even just thinking like without Kawhi, this team is still really good. Like they like you mentioned that they were making some damage last year in the playoffs, and that's without Kawhi at parts. But even so, like this team is even better now. They are the biggest what if I think right now in the NBA because like they're very similar, like you said, to the Nets, which I actually didn't think of before this. But in the Nets scenario, then the day you still already have your Kevin Durant and Kyrie, so they're gonna be good. Versus like the Clippers are still waiting on that one extra guy versus like the Nets are waiting for Ben Simmons and what happens there. And that's a huge what if. But to me, that's like a what if of like that
Not the
team
same
is,
magnitude.
yeah, yeah, different, definitely different magnitudes. And so yeah, they're a little bit in different spots, but it's crazy that right now what they're both the eighth seed. And so, like you said, this is a crazy time for the NBA to have your eighth seed being like, wait, these guys could actually win the championship. Like you, this is probably the only time where like a 1/8 seed like matchup wouldn't really be an upset, which is kind of crazy to say.
I think that's what makes this playoffs that we're about to undergo a very, very interesting one to see and like watch it unfold.
Yeah.
Um, in a group chat between us and a few friends, I did put this scenario in the simulation, and I got a pretty wonky playoffs. But one thing that rang true is that the Nets find a way, and but that's exactly how I feel with the Clippers. If they get everything that they need, they'll find a way, and I don't count them out if they have everything that they need. And honestly, you strip away those games that those guys weren't there, we're talking about a team that could easily been the one, two, or third best team in the West.
Yeah. No, 100% easily. And it's even crazy to think about like the West with the Grizzlies coming out of nowhere and then the Warriors, surprising a lot of people. And then even the Mavericks are looking like we're right behind the Warriors. Like, oh my God, there's so much room. It's pretty insane. I'm excited. Do you want to move on to our next topic, which is pretty much kind of on the same kind of thought process of the planes?
Would love to.
Word. So I'll break it down pretty quickly. So Of course, for anyone who doesn't know, the play-ins is something that was brought in, well, like last year, I think it was, where it's really the numbers you want to be safe. Is you want to be the sixth seed to be safe. So before in the past, it was always 1 through 8, but they wanted to make it a little more competitive. So right now, the seeds to watch are 7 through 10. And as of now, like I said, there's like 5 games left in the season for per team. It's still anyone's game. And we're seeing some pretty crazy things come out of, like, right now, we kind of have a three-way tie for in the East for the 8th seed, where the Nets have the tiebreaker as of now, but it's the Nets, the Hornets, and the Hawks all have the same record of 40 and 37. And then the 7th seed, which is the Cavaliers, have a record of 42 and 35. So with so few games left, there definitely could still be some movement. But as of now, my prediction is probably going to be like the Cavs staying at the 7th seed. But there's a lot of room for some movement there. So let's start with the Eastern Conference, like I said. Jeff, what do you think about the scenarios, and like what's your prediction of where the East lands at the end of the day?
Okay, so there's the dream scenario I have, and then there's the realistic
Yeah.
scenario of what I see happening. So right now, where we're sitting, we see Miami still on top of the East,
Yeah.
and that favors them to the extent and plays a part into this whole conversation of the play-in scenario. And I really do think it's going to be a little bit of teams dictating and deciding what's the best matchup for
Yeah.
themselves. But let's start off with Cleveland. So Cleveland obviously having a season that not a lot of us predicted for them, but they are showing their might currently. Obviously, going deeper inside some of the numbers, Cleveland and they're in the 7th seed. They're boasting a 24-15 record at home. So it's in their best interest to see if they could hold on to that 7th seed for that play-in tournament, potentially against one of the 3 teams, Brooklyn, Charlotte, and Atlanta. But I think that another number that we should really look at is between those 4 teams is strength of schedule.
Yes.
You spoke to me about this offline, and it's something I did a little bit digging into, and it looks like Charlotte has the hardest path to getting to this, with an average of opponents of having 5 around a little bit over 500% that they're going to have to play. Atlanta coming in second with a little bit under 500 with 497. And then Cleveland at 474. And then the Nets with the lowest at 400. So there's a world where, because the Nets are only simply 2 games behind Cleveland, where they could move into that 7th seed, and we're talking about a Nets home game, which now going into the numbers is not something that actually bodes well for the Nets, because the Nets are actually not a great home team this season. They have a record of 17-21, and you know that does make me a little concerned. But I think a lot of that plays in part to the Kyrie situation,
Hmm.
KD not being around, and that makes me a little concerned for that. But we all know this. When it all comes down to this, one of these teams are not built the same way as the other 4.
Yeah.
And it goes back into diving into those numbers. You go deeper into the numbers, you look at the Nets like stats, I mean records, you see the Nets are more comparable to these teams on the top of the East than they are to these teams on the bottom of the East. Granted, Cleveland is, like I said, having a great year, so they have a comparable. They do have some comparable numbers here, but division wise, other than actually Yeah, the Nets have the best division record in the Atlantic, where you have the Boston Celtics and Philly also
Mhm.
playing there, and Toronto as well, right? Actually, Toronto has the best. Toronto is 9-5, Nets are 9-6, but they're right there. They're
Yeah.
right there with them. Once again, conference wise, Nets have a comparable record to some of the best teams in the East as well, too, boasting a 28-20 record in the conference. Where you look at like Miami, that has the best is 31-16, so they're not that far off, right? And then the last thing that I think is a lot bigger to me than all the others is that the Nets actually have a solid road record where they're 23-16. So it's showing that they have shown the aptitude to be a road warrior. And I think for the Nets, if they're going to embark on a run in the East, they need to show that side in the playoffs as well.
Yeah. I think too with the whole net scenario, the biggest game on the schedule is going to be the Nets Hawks game because they
But
play each
Cavs,
other. So actually there is that too, but I guess just in terms of like I'm kind of thinking in terms of trying to stay at that at least 8th seed. That's probably the biggest because if you win that game, you essentially keep the Hawks down. You keep your lead pretty steady, uh, and so that's pretty huge. Definitely, of course, it's more ideal to be the 7th team, but at the end of the day, especially with the play in too, it doesn't really seem like there's too much of an advantage because at the end of the day, you're still going to, I mean, like you said, you're going to play at home for the play in, but you're still going to be fighting for that 7th seed. So I think it definitely is just like the most important is probably trying to keep above the Hawks. And so far, like we're saying, the Nets actually have just the easiest path there of like they verse the Cavs, Atlanta. Those are the two toughest games they have. And then you verse the Rockets, the Pacers, and the Knicks. Like that's the easiest schedule for the entire NBA as of now. Um, it's definitely pretty exciting to see of like how this can all play out because, like you mentioned, the Nets have they definitely have the best chance out of all those teams. But at the end of the day, with like a playing scenario, if they fell into like the 9th seed out of nowhere, now it's one game elimination. And that's the worst spot to be. And especially like you don't want to verse a team like the Hawks in that scenario where you have Trey Young and you have all the like that team. When they get hot, they're very hot, and that's just a very dangerous scenario, and that's exactly what you want to avoid. I wanted to ask, so yeah, what's your ideal scenario for the Nets right now? Do you want? I think I asked this a couple like last week, but especially with the matchup that we just saw of the Nets and the Bucks, like, do you want to verse the 1st seed or the 2nd seed? Or I mean, so in my prediction, I think the seedings are kind of going to stay the same, at least for the top 4 teams. Just even looking at like strength of schedule and all that stuff. So as of now, like I mean, like the 1st seed, the Heat, and the 2nd seed, the Bucks. Like, which one would you rather verse?
strength of I said strength of schedule. No, but I mean, based off of my dream scenario, it used to sound Miami, Boston,
Yeah,
but there's just something about the Sixers that just looks fractured. Um, and I think it is with gelling with a new player like Harden at this point in the season, them being depleted on the bench makes me think that the best path is stay at that 8th seed. And I know that's a dicey thing to go through if you're in the play-in and willingly lose a game
yeah,
and then go and win the second one because you just don't know what's going to happen in that game, right?
hmm
But I think it's infinitely smoother of a process to go through Miami, then go through Philly to making your way to Eastern Conference, then
Yeah.
going through Milwaukee, then going through Boston to make it to the Eastern Conference, because that is just a rough
Yeah.
road, and we saw that. You saw it
Yeah.
last year about how rough it is, and I'll save some of what I want to say about the Bucks for our
Yeah.
next segment, but it's it, the team. That team is they're an amazing team. Like,
Yeah.
there's nothing else to say. They're an amazing team. That's a tough out. Miami, just there's just something about Miami that always, when you get to this part of the season, you always feel like there's something missing or fractured. I'm not saying that the bubble is an anomaly, but I like to reference things in the sense of, like, when you look back at it historically, like, how does it hold weight to other types of playoffs and the absurdities of it? You know, a
Yeah.
team that the team that won it, right? Like, literally missed the playoffs, is on the verge of missing the playoffs 2 times out of the last 4 years. Lost in the
Yeah.
first round last year. The team that went to the finals, granted, they are in a great position right now, but last year had an off year.
Mhm.
You know, you have a team in the Nuggets that overcame a 3-1 deficit twice. There's too much absurdities that came
Yeah.
from that playoffs that just makes me think that, like, tying it back to Miami, is that a lot of that cannot hold weight to what we're going to expect out of this playoffs, because I think Miami showed you their true self last year in the playoffs when they were pushed hard in a real atmosphere, in a real playoff settings. It got a little tough for them, and they didn't even win a game in the playoffs last year.
Yeah. That's it. Definitely, out of all those teams right now, like, it's kind of surprising to say, but like, definitely Miami is the one that, like, I'm least afraid of if I'm the Nets or just any of these other teams. Like, that's the team I want to verse, because we see it all the time and time again, where it's really about star power in the playoffs. Like, that's what really matters. And we've seen it with Jimmy Butler and then even Bam Adebayo and all that. Like, I feel like Miami, you don't really have that pure number one guy. Like, who is that number one? I guess you would say Jimmy Butler, but like, it's really close between like who's next. And versus, you look at the Bucks, it's clearly Giannis. You look at the Celtics, it's clearly Jason Tatum. The 76ers, it's clearly Embiid. The Nets, clearly KD. Like, all these teams have a clear like number one guy, but Miami's the kind of the one team. Even Chicago, I guess, is kind of close, but I think at this moment it's pretty clear it's DeMar DeRozan. But the rest of these teams, yeah, I mean, Miami's just like the kind of the only one where it's like, I guess Jimmy Butler, like, I guess he's the guy that falls into that situation. So that's where I'm just a little lower on them. But at the end of the day, they still play amazing defense. They have an amazing head coach. But it's the playoffs, so we'll see.
But I will also add this as well too, to my hypotheticals.
Yeah,
There's a world where Toronto takes the fifth seed. There's a world where
there is.
Toronto can even get as high as the fourth seed, right?
There is,
Which
yeah.
is, shout out to Claude, because we thought he was crazy when he
Yeah,
said this earlier in the year,
we
that
did.
this is exactly where he thought they would be. And, kudos to him for even, believing
That's
this much
true.
that they could actually do this, right? But, there, so I'm a little shaky. I'm really shaky about, like, Philly
Yeah,
and what that scenario could be in the first round for them. No matter the team, it really looks like, besides Miami, they are the biggest question mark of what's
yeah,
going to go on in the playoffs, right? And let's be honest, the game is going to slow down. Well, that favors their two best players, is that the game slows down, right?
yeah,
But I don't think they're going to get the ticky tack fouls that they get in the regular season. in the playoffs. You know, they're going to have to play through pain. With a lot of, and I've seen that to be some of the reasons why we don't truly always get the best out of Joel Embiid in a playoff series,
Yeah.
because when you lean on that so much, it becomes a crutch, right? Anything you lean on becomes a crutch if you push on it too hard, right? And that's my biggest issue of like now thinking there's a world where the Nets will have to maybe play the Raptors in the second round. And that does not bode well for the Nets because here we go back with this Kyrie vaccinated
Oh, it's
situation.
so true.
And you now have a team that ultimately has the biggest handicap to throw on teams, because there was reports this week where they were discussing like the potential of Boston or Philly playing Toronto, and both teams declined to comment on whether or not all of the players on their team are vaccinated. And let
Yeah.
me just start off by saying this: how, and I was about to say something bad, but how ridiculous and how much of a, I think when it's all said and done, this might be the least amount of leadership that Adam Silver has shown since being commissioner,
Yeah.
and not standing besides the China debacle last year, but we'll not talk about that. But but for them to allow for something like this to be policed on,
Mhm.
like it almost feels like it's the government, like they're allowing certain things to be policed on the state level, on the municipalities of cities. There should be a uniformed
Yeah.
rule against this or for this, and it's not fair that a city can pick and choose that whether or not they're going to uphold this, because it's only going to make life so much harder for all these other teams that have players that just want to exercise their right in the ways that they want. No, this does not mean that I favor one way or the other. It's just I don't feel that a team should have the ability to strip people of the right to play in any said situation. It should be the NBA that makes that decision, and then it's uniformed across the league, because then there's less of ambiguity around what is right, what is wrong. Look at how long it took to get Kyrie back on the floor.
Yeah.
Think about how frustrating this is going to be as a playoff series if you see someone like Tobias Harris can't play because he's not vaccinated, and we just never knew this whole season. Or you go to Boston, and I've heard that the rumors is that it's Jaylen Brown is actually the one that's not vaccinated on the Celtics. So you take Jaylen Brown out of the equation when you already are set to be missing Robert Williams. That is a huge disservice to the
Yeah.
Celtics at that point. And and now tying it to the teams, the lack of a backbone it shows for these teams to have players that they've been concealing and letting Kyrie take all of the blame for this, and now they have no comment. That really irks me, honestly. That they are the league allow for there to be a presence where some teams gets to rule off anonymity, and then some teams have to be centered out on Broadway, to like be exposed for this.
Yeah. I mean, I guess to play at least like devil's advocate there, it's with like the Sixers and the Celtics like declining to comment on who's vaccinated and who's not. Um, it's never really come up, and like they never really had to announce any of these stuff. So like in the scenario with the Nets, I'm sure they could have declined to comment, but at the end of the day, you'd know immediately by seeing Kyrie Irving on the bench. Like there's no hiding that. Meanwhile, those other two teams, there kind of is no reason to, because there just hasn't been that opportunity that stops a player from playing. So like that's where I mainly see there. And then as well with like I wonder how big of a deal it would actually be, the Raptors scenario of like Toronto not allowing non-vaccinated players to play, because as we see for a lot of these other players, like they don't get the vaccine until they have to. So like we saw, like someone like Ben Simmons, he was a person that was not vaccinated, but as soon as he got traded to the Nets, like he got it. Andrew Wiggins was somebody that he didn't want to get it, but eventually he got it. Seems like generally Kyrie's the anomaly as of now that we've seen, of like just refuses to get it, depending like he was even fine to sit out the entire season, versus like maybe like you're saying, if it is Jaylen Brown, there is a world where it will be a lot easier for Jaylen Brown to just get vaccinated versus like wanting to set out for the playoffs. That's where I can see that going in that scenario. So as of now, I'm not too concerned about that scenario, but yeah, it just, you don't want to see it happen, and that would not be fun to allow the Raptors, especially if they end up playing the Nets somehow, that Kyrie can play. Like, I feel like at that moment, like you're saying, the NBA can just step in and be like, all right, the Raptors are going to play somewhere else, even though that's kind of fishy too, because home court advantage and all that. Like, there is no real easy solution, sadly, because we've never seen this before. So to finish off, at least on the Eastern Conference, who are your picks to make it out of the play-in?
Oh, it's gonna be real easy. Cleveland and Brooklyn.
Yeah.
I think that's a given. It isn't even a question in my mind. I think it's gonna be those two teams, and it begs to the question because I very well may do the same thing with the West and go to the point of thinking maybe this should be revised again and go back to what they did with it just being the 8 and the 9 and the 10 seed, because I just don't think it's fair for a 7th seed to have to vie for. But there's a world where the Cleveland could miss out on the
Yeah.
playoffs, and they currently are 2 games. It's only 2 games, but let's talk about the West slightly before we get to it. But there's a world where the wins column, like in the loss columns, the T Wolves are 6 games ahead of the Clippers, and they could literally lose to the Clippers and then lose to the San Antonio or New Orleans that's feeling hot and miss the playoffs. That is ridiculous. That is
Yeah.
ridiculous. And I'm sure if that happens, like the NBA will just say, you know what, we might have to change this.
It is like pretty heartbreaking, but
Hmm.
I kind of like it as of now, because like you're saying, like, because instead of a fight for the 8 seed like we saw a million times before, it's so much more competitive because it is a fight for the 6 seed. Like, that little bit of difference really makes a difference, because as we're seeing now, the entire NBA, there's so many good teams. Out of the 30 teams or whatever we see more than half of them actually be very good teams. So that's where it's like, good teams are missing the playoffs because of this new rule, which does make it a lot more exciting, because even so, like we're kind of saying, of Cleveland has a potential to do something. And even we saw like last year, like Atlanta, I'm still not counting them out yet, man. Atlanta is a very good team. They've also been pretty hot recently. We're counting out the Hornets, who've also been hot, but like, I know we saw it last year with Atlanta. Of they got that little playoff experience. Trey Young is something else. As much as it pains me to say it, I hate seeing the Hawks do well, but there definitely is that world where I see a Nets Hawks coming out of the play-in. Like, that could very easily happen, which is a scary place to be in. Next,
Rightfully so.
do you want to move into the Western Conference? So Definitely the Eastern Conference went a little bit longer because I mean that's the more fun place to be right now. But the Western Conference, there definitely is still a lot of room for movement. Just even looking at the seedings, where I see the most movement could be happening is between one, the Warriors and Mavs, the 3 and the 4th seed, because right now the Warriors have a record of 42 or 48 and 29, and the Mavericks have a record of 48 and 30. So really just one loss behind. Pretty crazy there. The next bucket I see is also between the 5th and the 6th seed, which the Jazz and the Nuggets are in. The Jazz have a record of 46 and 31, and the Nuggets have a record of 46 and 32. So literally one loss behind, same as we see with the Warriors. And then, like we're saying, I think there definitely is room for movement of Minnesota, the Timberwolves making a jump to 6, but likely probably not with just this little game. So I'm thinking Timberwolves mainly stay there, but then and especially too with the Clippers, just the way the amount of games there's left, Clippers are most likely going to stay in the 8th seed. But then this is where again kind of gets exciting because you have the Pelicans, the 9th seed, you have the Spurs, the 10th seed, and then you have the Lakers, who are just outside the play-in right now, trying to veer their head in. This is opposite from what we see in the West, or the East, where I think Washington's the next team and New York too, and like not even close. They're already eliminated, but the Lakers are not eliminated yet. A lot of room for movement. Jeff, what do you think about the West Coast?
So I'll start off with the Lakers.
Yeah.
They cooked. That Twitter
Yeah,
video
yeah.
like I forgot. I think it's Adrian Broner where he was like, "Man, I'm getting cooked right now." That's the Lakers right now. like they're cooked. Like I don't think
Yeah.
they find their way into the play-in.
Yeah.
A few reasons. Um, besides the putrid play, they don't deserve to be in a play-in, being 15 games
It's
under
true.
500 first. I could say the same thing about the New Orleans Pelicans and San Antonio,
Yeah.
but I'll digress. But based off strength of schedule, the Lakers have the hardest out of the 5 teams with 615% on the team average on the teams that they have to play in their remaining games. They just lost to the Pelicans last night. They've been losing uh, a lot of games lately. And then remember how I was saying how the Nets, you look at their situation and you look deeper into the numbers and you say that there's something that's different from this team. There's clearly something different from the Lakers and these other teams. And the biggest thing is the Lakers are 3-11 in their own division. The Lakers are 16 and 31 in their own conference. The Lakers are 11 and 27 on the road. Why would I believe that that team could do anything in this scenario? I just don't believe. And you look at every other team; it's near 500. For every one of those categories that I brought up, it's near 500. But simply for the Lakers, they just cannot put it together in any way or facet possible. So why would I believe that they figured this out and find themselves in the playoffs or in the play-in in this case? I don't. There was a lot of it was hanging on LeBron James and believing that LeBron would just will this team. But like I said, when your team's 11 and 27, you're gonna need like 3 LeBron James to help you get back to a position where you think you could win. And granted, obviously, they're stricken by injury, and the margin of error with injuries is a lot different in the West than it is in the East.
Yeah. Definitely definitely seems like the Lakers are dunzo. Uh, but at the end of the day too, the Spurs their schedule is also pretty tough. So one, the Lakers verse their last 5 games, they verse the Suns, most likely a loss. The Warriors most likely a loss, and Denver twice. So those are very hard. And then you verse the the Thunder. San Antonio, not easy as well. They have Golden State, they have Dallas, they have Denver, and Minnesota. And then they also their easy games, the Blazers. So it could swing anyway right now, but definitely that loss last night against the Pelicans,
It's not
that's
even
that's
just
huge.
that. You got to factor in that if based off of the teams that you just named, I could
Yeah.
see both teams going 1-4
Yeah,
in
exactly.
the record, and that's not a tie first. But in the season series, the Spurs have it over the Lakers.
Ooh.
So even that goes to show that nothing's really in their favor right now. I think the New Orleans stays where they are. They're probably going to win some more games as well. And then, like we said, it's not even a conversation to talk about them catching the Clippers, let
Yeah.
alone the Timberwolves. And once again, this is why I was saying the whole thing about I don't think it should be 7 that's vying for this because of this
Yeah.
reason. Is there's nothing, there's no reason why a team like the Lakers should be in the same breath as the T Wolves
Yeah.
in this year. Look at the numbers, look at the stats that the T Wolves are doing of how they turned around their season. They should not be in the same position as the Lakers.
Yeah. And
Oh,
that's where it is too of like I guess where you can say the scenario of all right, if the Lakers do make it and they're the 10th seed, they would have to verse the loser of the Clippers and the Timberwolves. And if they really aren't in that same conversation, then it should be an easy win for either the Clippers or the Timberwolves. So I guess that's where you can kind of have that little argument. But at the end of the day, still, I think right now, I think there's a report, or if he did play last night, I didn't remember. But Anthony Davis coming back, maybe that could sway some things.
he came back
It's
last night.
He came back last night. There you go.
And they lost.
Yeah. Oh yeah.
And they lost to the Pelicans.
That's true.
Like, come on, man. Like you can't make this thing up.
Yeah.
Like it's not looking good for them right now. I don't know if they right the ship. It's too much. It's
Yeah.
too much they've put on themselves in this season. They've signed a guy, Brian, and this is comical at this point now, is they've signed a guy in Chris Nunn that they believed was going to be a game stopper
Yeah.
by signing someone like that. You remember all the signings that we talked about,
Yeah.
and my confidence in them was solely on the sheer greatness of LeBron James, and the Lakers found a way to mess that up. Like they found a way to make that bad.
Yeah.
So I really just don't see a world where they make this work. And honestly, I like to believe there is basketball gods that favors karma, and like there just should not be a team that is this bad. But
Yeah.
like Brian, like I said, they're not even comparable to the teams that have terrible records like them
You're right.
in anything.
Yeah.
It's just not fair. It's not. It
It's
wouldn't be fair.
it's pretty sad. And that's the thing too of like in the world, let's say Lakers make it and then they somehow get their way out of the play-in. Then you have to verse either the Suns or the Grizzlies. Like it's just game over. Sadly, the Lakers season is done. LeBron James even knew it with like he can make it's the fact that he can make an April Fool's joke when he's like, "Yeah, guys, I'm done for the season," and like some people are like, "Really? He's LeBron sitting out for the rest of the season? Like, see you next year? That's a real thing." The fact that someone can buy that, that's when you know, like, it's the Lakers are down bad right now. They're
Yeah.
just there's no shot. I think LeBron knows it. I think he's made even comments of it. Like they're just not even that they're not good this year. Like they're done.
Oh,
It's sad.
I'm telling you, if that happens, if there's a way, a world, the Lakers make it to the seventh seed,
Yeah.
right? And and they play Memphis, or they get to the 8th seed and they play Phoenix, right? You would not hear the end of it in the owners' meeting about how they're going to repeal this playing
Yeah.
scenario because, like I said, it just does not, as much as it makes it exciting, but it does not favor teams that have put
Yeah.
in the work. And when we're thinking about it, like on the business side of it, right? Think about what that means for a team like Minnesota to go to the playoffs and what it means to the Lakers. Any
Yeah.
other year, the Lakers are going to remain in the same value as a team, right? The Lakers could have 10 bad years. They could have
Yeah.
LeBron James amputate both of his legs and play basketball, and they would still sell tickets.
Yeah.
T Wolves have put themselves in a situation that could financially help out their situation as an organization. And for them to lose it out in that way,
Yeah.
where they could potentially lose players, let's think about it on the micro side of it first. On the player side of it, there's the playoff bonuses that would favor them, right? And then on the macro side of it, the to the economy of Minnesota, um, or Minneapolis, you're bringing dollars to the
Yeah.
city, and the NBA has found a way to steal dollars from them if that happens, you know.
Yeah.
And I just cannot see a world where there would be owners that would see that and not complain about that next year,
Yeah. No,
this
I can
offseason.
I can definitely see that. Also, I wanted to say definitely a correction in terms of I think some of the things we've been saying of like I think the ninth and the 10th seed, or looking at it, the ninth and the 10th seed can only be the eighth seed at the end of the day because just looking at how it all works out. So keep in mind, I think for our last couple of conversations, even this one, like if the Lakers make it, they would only verse the Suns. If the Hawks would make it or the Hornets would make it, they would only verse the Heat. Just wanted to clarify that because I just realized that right now.
Yeah, I forgot about that aspect
Yeah,
too.
yeah. But still, it doesn't change too much. But yeah, no, ridiculous, very ridiculous. Um, let's make some predictions here. Who do you think comes out of the play-in for the West?
I think, like I said about the East,
Yeah,
7 and 8 stays 7 and 8, and
yeah.
that's where we go.
I think this one's definitely easier. I'm trying to like imagine the world where like the Pelicans come out. I mean, they've been very like you mentioned, they've been very hot recently. CJ McCollum's great addition for the Pelicans. Zion's not coming back. Like he's already shut down. Yeah. I think it's a pretty clear just 7-8 Timberwolves Clippers. Um, yeah, that's very interesting. Do you want to move on to our last main topic of the day?
I'm sit up,
This is what you've been waiting for here.
time to sit up. Yeah, I'm ready for it. So, 2 nights ago, the Nets and the Bucks were in a fierce battle on Thursday night on TNT. So
Hmm.
nationally broadcast game. These last couple games against the Nets and Bucks have been literally captivating. It's
Yeah.
honestly, it was funny to continuously hear Kevin Harlan say in the game that this was the Eastern Conference Finals, and no one corrected him any
Yeah.
of the times, right?
Yeah.
But that
It
was the
was.
magnitude of that series, was that it felt like these were the two best teams. uh, in some people's mind, some people say that was the finals.
It's
Is
true.
whoever got out of there was going to be the one that held the Larry B. Right.
Yep.
So for every game that we've seen since then, it's been interesting. I'll tell you, the first two times was complete stinkers by the Nets. So that was sad to see. But on my side of it, but like obviously for a Buck fan, they were probably happy to see that. But the last game that the Nets played them, the Kyrie showed his spectacular play, his heroics of how he could, at any given time lead a team to win. And then this final game served to be that statement game. I was a big proponent of last year, where I was upset that in the last game that they played in the season with the Bucks, that I thought it carried a lot of momentum heading into the playoffs about how the teams are going to feel about one another in a potential playoff series. So unfortunately, last year the Nets lost in that series. I mean, in that game, and then eventually in that series as well too. But they were without Harden at that time, and almost a similar situation where they
Yeah.
don't have Ben Simmons, but that's a very, very different scenario, right? In that situation. So heading into this game, you knew it was going to be a game that both teams circles on their calendar, right? Except for some weird reason, the Bucks are the NBA champions, but apparently the Nets are the team that everyone circles their calendar on
Yep.
because I swear, and I'm really digressing right now. I swear that every team that has an injured player, their player comes back when they play the Nets. I've seen it all season long. AD, Giannis,
Mhm.
Embiid, literally, the list is long of players that just came back from their injuries because they're playing the Nets, right?
Yep.
So you knew that this game was going to get both of the teams up. The Nets found themselves in the fourth quarter of that game, um, starting to assert their dominance and take control of the game. And I believe it was Bruce Brown who, at this point, had blocked Middleton 3 times on jump shots,
Yep.
not on layups, on straight up jump shots, which was honestly amazing to see, right?
Mhm.
So I believe he stole the ball in this case and was breaking free for a dunk. He saw Middleton. There was a simple way Middleton could have just touched his back or held him while knowing that he was on the ground because he was literally right behind him, and not let Bruce Brown go up. But Middleton decided while Bruce Brown was suspended in air to to grab Bruce Brown and bring him down to the floor. Initial initially seeing it, my mind was obviously Nets fan. Uh, what's wrong with this guy? He's crazy. I don't know what's wrong with him. There's definitely a flagrant, right?
Mhm.
I did not think it was a flagrant two at that moment. No, I looked at it and I was like, "There's a flagrant one. He's still gonna play, but it's definitely a flagrant." So I was shocked when the ref came back,
Yeah.
gave them a flagrant two. But giving it some time to breathe and think it through, this is what beckons this whole question about the Bucks is that almost is frame by frame the same
Mhm.
exact play Grayson Allen did
Yep.
to Caruso. And luckily enough, the same outcome did not happen
Yep.
where you have Caruso who broke his wrist, you know? And it's funny too to have this come full circle because I remember mentioning how Middleton was so nonchalant about how that play happened for Grayson Allen and thought that it wasn't as bad of a play. It's just a hard foul. But for to see him do the same exact thing, I
Mhm.
think that was playing in the minds of the rest as well because they knew that this was something that happened with this same very well with the same team less than 6 months ago. So I know I have more to unpack
Yeah,
on it,
yeah.
but I want you to hear
Yeah.
what you think about this game at least first, Brian.
One fantastic game. It's like you're saying, it really as of now just kind of feels like whoever comes out of the East, and it really feels like it's going to be either the Bucks or the Nets. Like like you mentioned with the Kevin Harlan thing of like Eastern Conference of last year, even though it wasn't, like it really does feel like that. These teams, if anything, this is like these are two teams that don't like each other. It's this is a really good rivalry. Both teams, fantastic. You have, I'd say, the two best players in the world right now. Maybe like Kevin Durant's not going to win MVP, but if he was healthy and everything, he'd definitely be in that conversation. But definitely with like Giannis and KD, like those are can easily be 1 and 2. Um, so it's fantastic to see. I love seeing these games. But to go to that specific foul, so you kind of said a lot of the same things that I wanted to say in terms of uh, the Grayson Allen looking like there. You mentioned that like Chris Middleton like grabbed Bruce Brown to the ground. I saw it more as like a very heavy slap. Like I didn't think it was a grab, but I definitely thought it. I thought it deserved a flagrant two because at the end of the day, it might maybe not super intentional. It was 100% reckless. That to it didn't seem like a play to the ball. Where the Grayson Allen one kind of felt a little bit more, but at least in my memory, I would have to rewatch it. I should have rewatched it, but it felt like
I did.
that was more of like a throw to the ground, like you're not getting any shot up, like I'm stopping that. Versus this is like I'm trying to just foul you very hardly, but extremely reckless because Bruce Brown is directly in the air. And like you mentioned, definitely funny to see with uh like Chris Middleton was the one that defended Grayson Allen at that time. It's definitely very reckless and deserved the flagrant two in my opinion.
So yeah, another aspect of it that I thought about too as well, like piggybacking off what you said, is like it was more of like a slap, but like think about the physics of it,
Yeah.
like momentum. It's momentum. Like
Hmm.
if you're going to impede someone's momentum when they're suspended in air, there's only one way that could go, and it's not
Yeah.
usually a good way, and it's almost near never a good situation for someone to be in air, made contact with in that way, and the situation ends good for that person. And luckily enough, the, Bruce didn't get hurt. You know, he did not
Yes.
get hurt
Yes.
from that play. But I think the best part of what you were saying as well too is reckless. Some people may lean on that side of it for the Bucks rather than say that they're dirty. Is that they play very reckless. You heard Kyrie mention it in his press conference after the game. You heard KD voice his frustrations with some of the reckless play as well. And honestly, it ties into this thing is that both teams embody their best players, right?
Yep.
Is that Giannis is a brute force type of guy, while KD is a finesse guy. There was literally a picture where you see KD take a shot off, and he made the shot on three guys lunging at him at the same time. Granted, no foul, no foul. But my God, like the way how they guard KD when you see them play is insane
Yeah.
in my mind of how they close out, how they you know they still don't trust Bruce Brown's shot enough, and Bruce Brown has gotten a lot better with his shot, but you see the lack of confidence and like even sending just two guys at Katie's at time. They won't. They rather send three
Yeah.
at some points in the game, right? So that the reason why I bring that up is a lot of that goes into, like I was saying, is they embody some of the way how Giannis played. Giannis, and this is why I think it has to be moved in your mind from them being a reckless team to a dirty team. Because you could go as far as back as 2015, and this is real deep digging right here, Brian. Is in I believe it was Jason Kidd that was still the coach at the time.
Yeah.
I think it was the first round. Bucks played the Bulls, and it was Game 6, and Giannis just flung himself into Mike Dunleavy. Literally, no reason. It was just frustration. He flung himself into Mike Dunleavy and didn't make a play at the ball at all. I can't help but think that someone that is open to doing something like that changes their mindset. And I'm still on my soapbox. There's another thing I'm going to add to this conversation is that the NBA has found a way to make Giannis the NBA's darling. He's very
Mm-hmm.
marketable.
Yep.
And I'm going to be really honest with this one right here, too. It's because Giannis could speak to so many different demographics. He's an
Mm-hmm.
African American man, he's a foreign man, he's Greek, he's a likable, charismatic like type of personality, and he plays himself off as a humble guy as well. You know, so there's
Family
a
man.
lot to like.
Mm-hmm.
Exactly, there's a lot to like about Giannis, right? But the thing is, there's got to be a line where you draw in your mind that Draymond Green is the same type of guy too, though. Like he's a likable guy when you really get down to the core of who he is as a player, but or how he's liked by his teammates, by
Yeah.
other players, about what he's even doing in the podcasting world right now, right? Like someone that isn't likable is not going to be able to do that,
Yeah.
right? But yet he has a different stigma around him than Giannis. And I've seen, yes, Draymond Green had some un, unforgivable things that he's done
Yeah.
in his career. But Giannis is starting to build a portfolio of that as well. And he plays it off as like, I didn't see it, or
Yeah.
like, I didn't mean to do that. And it's constantly coming up where it's like, is he really not seeing this, or is he just playing, like we said, quote unquote, recklessly
Yeah.
and allowing all the chips to fall, and whatever happens happens. And I can't I can't help but think about how many times I've seen Giannis push off someone.
Yep.
Literally, not like we said, the Kyrie Irving one is the most damning out of all of them. Granted, it's not like you see there's 100% intent in
Yep.
what he's doing, but you coming down on a guy that is smaller than you first, and you slide underneath him, you got to understand what the impact of that was going to be, you know?
Yeah.
And it ties into the same game where you looked at what Wesley Matthews did to KD, where very well, I thought the season was over. Like the season looked like it was over for a
Yeah, it
second
did.
because of that play.
It would kind of be interesting if we can look back and see like how many players actually get injured against the the Bucks, because I feel like it would be pretty high, and because I
Trust
just
me,
yeah, you've looked at
Ryan. I looked it up.
you looked
It
at
was so hard to find.
I'm
It
sure.
was so hard to find. But I'm sure. And honestly, listeners, if you got clips that you want to
Yeah.
show us or send us our way so we could see some of this, but I was digging. And that's how I found the 2015 one, you
Okay.
know?
Yeah. Yeah.
And there's, like you said, there's been a number of times where
Hmm.
they've done or put people in situations where it compromises a player.
It does. With someone like Giannis, I think it's actually kind of like a mix of reckless and a little dirty. Mainly because we see the way that Giannis plays, and this guy plays at like 110% all the time. Now you never really see Giannis take a play off. You never see any of this. He's always hustling like crazy, which in return also can make a lot of his movements a little reckless because he's just playing that hard. And then at the same time too, what kind of looks like the rest of the Bucks just kind of do in general, they like to get their money's worth out of fouls. They like to do this kind of stuff, and like any way they can kind of, which is smart at the end of the day, anywhere where you can kind of get an advantage and like sneakily push a player or do anything like that, they do that, which at the end of the day, a lot of teams, a lot of players do this. But it seems like the Bucks kind of do it a little bit more than others. But that's where I kind of lean a little bit more towards reckless for Giannis, just because, like I said, like he just plays that hard, and like I've
And
seen, yeah, please,
I think, sorry,
no,
needed a little bit of that, but I think it's something that has to be asked and questioned because I think a large part of the Nets losing that game is the refs changing the tempo of the game in the
yeah,
last couple of minutes. Like it literally became a foul fest at the end of the game. Granted, the Nets
mhm,
did not make it easier on themselves, having like a Claxton and having a Drummond on the floor who missed crucial
yeah,
free throws before the end of regulation. But and Brian, I don't curse on this podcast, but today is going to be the day I have to say one. It is complete horseshit that they called an offensive foul on, in my case, and I know I've had
yeah,
this
yeah,
conversation with you,
hmm,
is calling an offensive foul on Bruce Brown at that present moment. I
yeah,
understand that he flung Giannis into his momentum into KD, which led to KD being out of bounds. But I would have, if I'm a ref, we go back and we say that there's no call there, and then we jump the ball. That's how we decide that because that is at that present moment in the game with 18 seconds left in the game, you're going to allow an offense foul of that magnitude to dictate the game is really, really, really asinine to me because I just really felt like it did affect a lot of the other plays that we're going to talk about or we did talk about. Yes, there were momentum swingers, but I think that that's the one that not a lot of people are talking about, but
hmm,
that is the true one that decided that game. And it's funny that it happened to be Bruce Brown again
yeah,
because I really think
yeah,
that Bruce Brown is the guy that swung the momentum in the series last year, where
yeah.
the Nets could have very well been up 3-0. And it's funny to see it come full circle. And once again, something that he did affected the Nets winning the game.
Yeah. See, like you mentioned already, because like we talked about this offline. Yeah, I do kind of feel like it was the correct call at that moment because, like you mentioned, he pushed. It was an obvious push and shove that altered the play in the ball. I didn't see it at first. I was very surprised that even the refs saw it at the time. I was impressed by it. Even look at the review. I thought it was very fair. What I would like to see instead of the jump ball, because like I said, in my opinion, that was a clear offensive foul. What I would like to see is they actually just call that more fairly and more evenly throughout the game. Because you mentioned as well in our private conversations, Giannis does this all the time. Players do this all the time where they shove after the screen or they do this they push players in the back all the time. But generally it doesn't create a scenario like this one did where it forced Giannis to kind of push KD out of bounds. So that's where the little difference is. The jump ball there, a little bit tough. Like I said, I just rather see it be called more evenly throughout the entire game. So it doesn't get to a scenario like that because you hate when the refs can alter the end of the game.
That's the thing too, and there's the inequality in fouls being
Yeah.
called. Yes, I know that a lot of the Nets game is predicated off jump shots, and the Bucks game is a little bit different, where it's a lot of driving, right?
It's all Giannis driving.
But but the inequality of and this is not just only the Bucks game, but like I've seen an inequality in how fouls are called of like against the Nets and other teams because they do rely on that finesse. And a lot of the time, I think it's because the refs and the refs always have this in their mind is that he makes a shot, I'm not going to call it, right?
Yep.
And because of that, a lot of the times you'll see Katie have to take a ridiculous shot, and they're sitting there and they have to wait for a second or two to realize if it's going to go in.
Yep.
And by then, they already made their mind, I'm not going to call it, and that really does. It was ridiculous for me to hear in the game and overtime was the first time Katie got to the line and he was constantly in double teams and triple teams. And let's flip the scenario with thinking of a guy like you're thinking of a guy like Embiid that at
Yep.
will, almost if Embiid's just looking at someone, he's gonna get a foul call, right? And obviously the physicality that he's going to the lane is different than what Kevin Durant is going to the rim with. But it's not like Kevin Durant does not drive. And then not only just that, we brought up how you mentioned it. It makes is that Kyrie Irving
Mhm.
does not get the benefit of a whistle a lot more than
Yep.
KD because Kyrie willingly is always going to the rim. And sometimes it's just ridiculous to see him even finish it. And it goes back to beckoning the same thing is a lot of the time the refs are holding it in and wondering like, am I gonna blow this whistle? I'm not gonna blow it before we know if it's going in. And then that could really dictate
Yep.
um uh how the game's going to go. But like it's just so trained, or your eyes are so the ref's eyes are so trained that any instance that Giannis drives, like it seems like seconds even before he even makes contact, it's already going to be called a foul, you
Yep.
know? And
Yeah.
that's where I go where the foul inequality plays a part into it. And honestly, going back into that series again, I remember the Nets speaking on that, and it literally changed the game. The next game, the game the Nets
Yep.
had won by 49 in game two, it dictated that game because um, what's his name? Steve Nash spoke up on it, and he was like, "There's this is kind of ridiculous, like
Yeah.
the type of beating our players get, and there's no fouls, and then you go down the lane, and you touch Giannis, you look at Giannis wrong, you get a foul."
Yeah. So there's a few thoughts I have on this. So one, you mentioned a lot already of my thoughts of the jump shots kind of scenario. And I guess this kind of plays into just like you mentioned, the Nets are a lot of finesse and just skill type of moves. So, like we see, like when Kyrie drives to the rim a lot of times, he's so skilled at getting to the rim and then also just like avoiding a lot of contact and even finishing through contact. But at the end of the day, he's able to finish without forcibly drawing a foul. And that's where you see players like James Harden, Trae Young, Embiid, Giannis, Jimmy Butler, all these guys, when they're driving to the rim, they're forcing contact. What it seems like to me a lot of times is they're not really, their first thought process isn't like, let me actually try to score here, but more let me get fouled and create that contact. And so, like, this is where that's where I kind of see like the reason why the Nets don't get as many fouls. And then as well too, like when you do that a lot, you get that reputation. So the Nets don't really have that reputation of trying to draw contact versus like I mentioned all those other players because I've even seen it with someone like RJ Barrett, where he would drive to the rim all the time, wouldn't do all these little moves, throw your head back when you're running to the rim, all these little things. He would never really get a lot of foul calls. He'd take a lot of contact. Versus, I remember there's a moment when he was versus Jimmy Butler, where Jimmy Butler is like, go at my chest when you're driving to the rim, do all these things, create contact. And now this season, if you look at RJ Barrett's numbers of free throw attempts, especially like when he turned it on and he became way better after like the All-Star break, it's really just the free throw attempts. He's just creating and drawing contact, and then he just makes his free throws, and that's why his points per game total just went up like crazy. It's those little things which I'd love to see the NBA get away from, and we see a little bit with those rules of, especially with jump shots, that they kind of got away from, but still, like, it's so hard to guard someone like Giannis, because when he runs to the rim, he extends his arms like crazy, and his arms are so long, and you're trying to block the shot, and he can even throw his arms up into your arms and all these little things. Like, it's so hard to guard. I would have liked to see. I thought Andre Drummond was doing a great job defending Giannis, and like, I feel like he made a couple really clean plays that they called fouls on that I didn't agree. So that's where it stinks that Giannis gets like the benefit of the doubt in those scenarios. Just because, I mean, we see it all the time, even with LeBron. Like, these guys get the benefit of the doubt if you're a star.
Yeah. But that's where, like I said, it
Yeah,
comes full circle with begging the question about Kevin Durant.
yeah,
Is yes, obviously we've gone over it enough to say that he's gonna take his jump shots, right?
yeah. Which he's
But
great at.
exactly, but the amount of times you get a slap on the arm, on the
Yeah,
wrist, while Kevin Durant's getting a shot up, and he voicefully
yeah,
is speaking on it, like that they're slapping him, that they're hitting him, and nothing happens,
yeah,
is where I'm like, why is he not getting that same benefit? Is it because it's not selling it as much? And I'll give another scenario that just shows truly how, like, it's funny because we talk about how skinny Kevin Durant is, but we don't think about how strong he is at the same time.
yeah.
Is I look back to a game where they played Mavs, and you look at Kevin Durant was was getting guarded by Maxi Kleber, Kleba, Kleba,
I think
yeah.
it's Cleveland. Yeah,
And Kleba, you look at that guy, you're like, yeah, he's definitely bigger than Kevin Durant,
yeah,
right? And there was just one play where Kevin Durant, like, you could see he was just fed up, and he just put all of his strength into him, and it knocked Kleba to the ground.
yeah,
Sometimes I do wonder if Kevin does pull his punch on doing that, and if that's more of like self-preservation things of reasons why he does that, rather than be like these guys, like you said, that are driving to the rim. But I think it is. I think it shows you that it is, because when it really comes down to it, like the type of injuries Kevin Durant almost never has
yeah,
ankle injuries, but these guys like you've mentioned are almost routinely known for having ankle injuries because of what they're doing. You
yeah.
know, besides Giannis, because he's not human. you know, but but yeah, like it just goes to show maybe he is pulling his punch, and he's saving that for when he needs it the most.
Yeah.
You know.
It definitely is. Well, one, on like the superhuman thing of Giannis, I thought was kind of interesting. Of like, we said the same thing about LeBron all the time, and then now his age has started to go past, and he's getting older. A lot of ankle injuries for LeBron, and so maybe we might see that in the future for
Yeah,
Giannis when he's like
I
40.
got
But
I got something for you offline. I can.
all
I
right,
don't. I think it's too spicy to say on
all
the
right, all right.
podcast, but I'll
We'll
say
see.
it after.
We'll save it. We'll save it. But it, with the jump shots thing, especially getting slapped in the arm, the biggest thing is selling it. It's the, you flail your legs out, you throw your head back, you move your arms. Like, it honestly, it makes the world of a difference, because the refs aren't gonna see the hit and the contact all the time, but they will see the reaction. And I see it all the times with all those other players. And like I've mentioned before in the past, of the Knicks have their own guy that studies all these other people. He does all this stuff, and like, he draws a lot of fouls because he throws his hairs back. He does all this stuff. Like, he does all these little tricks. And so, like, I see it firsthand there of like, it makes the world a difference of like, you're not really trying to make the shot, but you're really just trying to sell the contact, versus like Kevin Durant can make the shot most of the time, even with all that contact. So he just goes for it, and he's so efficient at it. So definitely, Definitely pretty crazy.
Yep. And I don't. Do you have
Yeah.
any more points on
No, no,
this?
no.
So I'll leave it off with this. Is um, I actually want to revise what I was saying in the playing scenario.
Okay.
I'm actually, I would say, and even though it was a loss that last game,
Yeah.
I'm actually more confident about the Nets now about playing the Bucks and potentially meeting them in the first round than I ever was before.
Hmm.
Because, like I said, a lot of that game was dictated by the whistle at the end of
Yep.
it. Because you saw the run that the Nets took to take the lead, and it looked like the game was in their grasp. And literally every play after that alley oop from Kevin Durant
Hmm.
was a play where the you're seeing Giannis at the line, and it's I think in the playoffs that slows down. That really does slow down. But yes, Giannis still is going to get his whistles in the playoffs as well. But that game is going to be a lot different than what it is in the playoffs, right?
Yeah.
And I think that those type of moments get guys like a KD and Kyrie up. And that was the one thing that we were missing last year. Literally, we were a Kyrie, a, even a Kyrie 10-point game
Yeah.
away from winning that series, right? At certain points because of that, because the injury, right?
Hmm.
But you know, I'm thinking, like I think back on it and I look at it, that series, and I look at what they have now, and you just see the biggest difference is you don't have PJ Tucker anymore, and there's a lot to be said about that annoyance
Yeah.
that he can provide, or he provided to KD, because he could get if you could get KD off of his game for 5 minutes, because literally, let's be honest, there's no one that could get KD
Yeah.
off his game. But if you could get him off of his game for 5 minutes, 2 minutes, even,
Yeah.
I could decide if you win the game. And there's just not that same player on the Bucks. And this is something that's infamously said now at this point, is if you look back at it, or you look at a lot of the playoff series that the Bucks play, Giannis typically is not playing the best, is not defending the best player on the other team.
Yeah.
So I think he will be tasked with doing that. Look at Wesley Matthews was
Hmm.
guarding KD on Thursday. So
Yeah.
that just goes to show that it's not like it's a myth. It's the truth. Yes, he was helping out at some plays, but imagine if Giannis had to stay with KD all game
Oh
long.
yeah.
Like it would be a whole different scenario than that. And
Yeah.
and look at how willing KD is once he understands the assignment is Giannis is doing his thing. I need to switch to playing Giannis, is how the game, how
Yeah.
he changes, because he understands, like, as the top player, I need to be the guy that's stopping this guy, and pretty much they have the same, I would say, body composition, but body types, and the
Yeah.
lankiness, and being that tall, and able to what they could do on the court, right? So I think it's going to be tremendously seen how crazy it's going to look in a playoff series where now Middleton, yes, he's going to try to stay. Either they
Yeah.
have Middleton on, they'll have Middleton on Kyrie, or they'll have Drew Holiday. I think Drew Holiday
Yeah.
plays Kyrie pretty well, but still, Kyrie's Kyrie. He'll figure
Yeah.
out some way. But if Ben Simmons come in, and that's the caveat of
Yeah.
this whole conversation, is that Shams reported that he's ramping up again, and it looks like they still believe he should make a run for the playoffs. Is We saw how James Harden, with a bum hamstring who could not run, being a decoy, helped the Nets win Game Five. About Ben Simmons, who I would say at this point would be a little healthier than
Yeah.
what Harden was at that present moment as a decoy would bring on the offensive side of dishing the ball and getting Kyrie and Katie their looks. But not only just that, also being that defensive presence that says, you know what, Katie, maybe you could take a couple of reps off. I got Giannis this one.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like I really do think that's the determining factor of like what will separate the Nets
Yep.
from the Bucks if they have an opportunity to play them is if Ben Simmons is healthy, it lightens the load for KD to be more of the offensive maestro that he is.
No, 100%. I think it's exactly what you said of if Ben Simmons does make a comeback in that series, I give the edge to the Nets. If Ben Simmons is not playing, I can see it going either way. I think it's 50-50. So that's where it leads to. Definitely would be ideal, I would assume, for the Nets if you don't verse the Bucks in the first round. You have to verse them later on so you can see Ben Simmons come back even healthier if he doesn't have to rush himself. Um, yeah, no, I'm not gonna say anything more. I thought you put it really well. Very interesting to see what happens going forward. The best is that is the best matchup. Is the best series that we're probably gonna see. So we can touch on this a lot more in the future. Let's do some rapid fire weekly roundup. We're already at an hour and 30. So I'm only mainly going to do maybe 2, maybe 3, see how long we go. But rapid fire. So first, we touched on it a little bit. You mentioned it. Robert Williams tore his meniscus, underwent knee surgery, expected to miss 4 to 6 weeks. How do you think this affects the Celtics?
Season over. Amazing season, but season's over now because the way how he fed into how he plays has immensely changed what Boston has been this season, what they've been able to do this season, and that's what they brought him there for. Time Lord to be
Yeah,
is that guy that shores up the middle for them and is able to give that defensive presence to tie in it all together. I still think that there's a world where they could give a good because I'm of the mindset that Toronto's going to take the fifth seed,
yeah,
so I think they could beat Chicago, and have a good you know a good series with them. But they come up against Milwaukee potentially. Um, come up against potentially if the Nets get it, or come up against. I think those are the two teams that
yeah.
realistically think. Or I don't think they have a problem with Cleveland if Cleveland makes it that far. But
Agreed.
um, yeah, like with those three teams, I see them just having so much problems. And honestly, let's say Toronto stays, I could see them being a first round out.
Yeah,
Could very well be a first round out.
definitely. Huge miss. Robert Williams is the huge reason why the Celtics are the best defense in the NBA right now. So him leaving, they still have a lot of good guys on their bench and everything. Massive miss. Maybe if the Celtics make it long enough in the playoffs, maybe he can come back for maybe a finals appearance or something. Who knows? But huge miss. Definitely season ender, in my opinion. Next.
Isn't it ironic that last week I said that they were my
Yes.
most favorite, and then now, literally day after,
Yeah.
Robert Williams got injured.
See, when you said that too, I couldn't like deny it. Like I could see it, man. They've just been so good. The Celtics have just been so good recently, and then they lose their best guy or one of their best guys.
One of their best guys, yeah.
Next, Doc Rivers. Doc Rivers again speaking out against his players on the fourth quarter struggles against the Pistons that they had the other night. Quote for quote, Doc Rivers said, "The bench didn't struggle. they just didn't get a lot of shots. And he thought it was us in that stretch, it was more James Harden than them. What do you think about this?
I think people are around the league are starting to get to realize that James Harden experience is truly an experience. Like it has to, and I'm not trying to make a joke out of it. It
Yeah.
is something that you had to wholeheartedly buy into and understand that the game's going to run through him now.
Yeah.
And the way how they play is going to run through him now. You could look at the difference of Nets pace of play and offense when James Harden was on the Nets and what they look like without him. And you could see night and day two different teams. The team is a faster paced team. The ball moves, it doesn't stick as much. You see people finding their spots a lot easier. Going back to selling the foul situation. Well, Harden, it's a lot of selling the foul, a lot of step back threes,
Mhm.
and never mid-range shots, like never. Like think about it. It's almost ridiculous
Yeah.
how little he shoots from the mid-range. But that's why it's like it's very, very interesting to see how Doc Rivers makes any adjustments. And Doc Rivers is notorious for being a guy that changes up the scripts and adjusts things over time. I am being very sarcastic with
Yeah.
that. If you did not catch the drift of that one. But it's I've seen that has been some of the reasons why I've seen um Doc Rivers teams lose in the playoff is because he doesn't adjust as quick as you would want him to be, right? Um, it's he's the only guy in the league that you could say this about is that he had 3-1 leads multiple times and lost them. There's no other coach that you could put that on, and that just speaks to what I'm saying is like he doesn't adjust very quickly to what's going on with his team. And because of that, he likes to be a very vocal about his opinions about certain players. So that the fact that he brought it to the press conference, he definitely let James Harden hear it. And apparently now there's reports that are saying some players in Philadelphia are not feeling Doc Rivers right now. And I'm a betting man, so I would say that I like to put all my money on that one of those guys is James Harden.
Yeah. 100%. Yep, that's an easy. James Harden is one of those guys. It definitely is crazy. Um like you said, when you're not moving the ball and we're not doing all this stuff, like it really does bog down the team. And you need, if that one guy is not going to pass the ball and he's going to dribble and ISO a lot of times, you need him to be extremely dominant. And if James Harden is having a bad night, then you just kind of lose, and that's your team. It's pretty interesting to see what happens with Philly and if they can pick it up for the playoffs. But as of now, the experiment is not looking too well. Um,
It definitely is not. And
lot.
and honestly, another thing too is James Harden. What has made James Harden an easier guard recently is he is regressing on
Mhm.
his 3 pointers, and it's just not at the same clip that he had a few years ago. I think he's actually shooting ridiculous. He's probably the lowest. Yeah, this is one of off of his average. This is the lowest season that he's had from the three, shooting at
Mhm.
33% currently. So it's making the defense be a lot more honest on him.
Yeah.
And it's kind of hilarious because we go back to the whole Giannis thing, like where he used to come at Giannis for lack of skill,
True.
and now his skill of being able to get to the rim is the thing that he's like literally carrying his
Yeah.
his season on now most of the time.
That is actually really funny and ironic that his skill has fallen like that.
Yeah.
Uh,
And another thing to add to that too is that his weight is an attribute too. Like
yep.
there's no way it can't be contributing to that because he just doesn't have the same lift.
Yeah. It's the Sixers right now. I wonder if they're regretting a little bit. Maybe they would have liked to keep some Seth Curry and Drummond on their team, and Ben Simmons just sitting on the bench. Not even. Oh man. Let's lastly, last report. This actually came out I think 2 weeks ago, but then there was even an update. So we had a whole segment on the Denver Nuggets. And it looked like it was going to come really nicely of Jamal Murray and Michael Porter Jr. coming back for the playoffs. Now there are reports of Jamal Murray probably not going to be back for the playoffs. There's reports of the regression of Michael Porter Jr.'s rehab progression and like him not looking too good. How do you think this bodes for the Denver Nuggets?
Congrats on the MVP, Jokic, two-time MVP, amazing man, but it's gonna be a first round exit.
Yeah, that's really what it seems like. It's sad. I wanted to see Denver at full power, but they just don't really have a lot of luck there. It's pretty sad. It's pretty sad. Well, that's all I had for the weekly roundup. This is a fun episode. This is fun. I love when you go on your tyrants about at least the Nets, and especially when we get to talk about the Nets and the Bucks. It is way too fun. Is there anything you want to say before we end the episode?
Hey man, since you brought it up, I was gonna say it when we were doing this segment, but I guess this is a better time. Some people might say this is blasphemy, but I think this is the truth. Is we're looking at this generation's version of the Pistons and Bulls and I think we could be seeing series with the Nets and Bucks for some time now, and I think that it carries out the same way. Like when you look at it, similarities and like philosophy of team. Like I said, Michael Jordan was a lot more of a finesse player than anyone on the Pistons were, right? But the Pistons were just brute force, right? And that's what it's looking like in this current era of the NBA of what brute force and defensive will and might looks like in the Bucks, and the Nets are that finesse team. Hopefully, we don't have to see the Nets lose to the Bulls 4 times and like the Pistons. I said the Bulls to the Bucks 4 times, like the Bulls did to the Pistons. But we get to see the Nets be a little triumphant. At least I hope that's what happens. But it's only this series, this team's the rivalry that's starting between them is only great for the NBA. Who thought it was going to be the Bucks and the Nets? Like, to be honest, but now since it's been a pleasant surprise, and it's going to be, I think, one of those rivalries we talk about for years.
Oh yeah, no, I think it's a really good comparison, very good comparison. Yeah, we should see. I mean, we talked about it a few times in the last couple episodes of the Nets. Like, they kind of have their core locked up for a long time. And Giannis seems like he's going to stay in Milwaukee for a very long time. And you have Chris Middleton isn't going anywhere. Drew Holiday most likely isn't going anywhere. Giannis isn't going anywhere.
They're locked up as well.
Yeah, so we're gonna see them for a very long time, and this is definitely going to be one of the matchups that we talk about for the ages. So very exciting time for the NBA.
Agreed.
Well, that is episode 26. Make sure follow the Twitter. It is on the screen. Check out the YouTube. Subscribe to the YouTube. Throw some likes. Do all this stuff. Let us know. I ask every time. Let us know. This is another longer episode. We're an hour and 45 right now. If you want it shorter, if you want it more digestible, let us know. If you like it like this, again, let us know. So, hope you enjoy this episode. This is episode 26.
Peace.